Okay, so everybody welcome. Hopefully we aren't falling asleep or still in lunch coma. Stretch and do whatever you need to do. But welcome to my talk. I'm doing today Reactivity in the Web with Svelte. So a little bit about me. I'm new to the industry-ish, so my name is Brendan Todahl. I'm a senior consultant at CGI, and I've been in the industry for about 5 years. I graduated from The Ohio State University. When I'm not doing tech stuff, I enjoy running in my free time, golfing, Ohio State football. Unlike a lot of other very talented speakers, I don't have a blog, I know, I'm sorry. But you can find me on LinkedIn, and I have a GitHub where all of the content for today's presentation will be. So just because of the nature of what I'm going to be doing, I know lots of code in the afternoon. Like I said, do what you got to do to stay awake. I know sometimes people take pictures of stuff. Don't fret. If you take a picture of anything, there's a GitHub link right there where all of this is up there. I'll go nice and slow. Cool. So thinking about our day-to-day life, let's say you're going to experience a range of emotions when you wake. Let's say, for example, you wake up in the morning. I'm a big morning person, so I'm usually happy. Other people might need some coffee first before they get happy, otherwise they're a little grumpy. But the point I'm trying to make is you don't have to go through this checklist. You don't have to say, am I happy? Am I sad? Am I angry? And then decide from there. You just know it's a natural reaction to the environment around you. As technology has continued to modernize, wouldn't it be also very nice if technology and apps that we work with every day react naturally to our inputs, to state, and everything else? So I have to start with React. And I'm going to talk about some different frameworks today, specifically Svelte, but how it most importantly compares to its other competitors, because there's so many options and there's always another front-end framework, right? So when React hit the market, it obviously did a lot for us as front-end engineers. It introduced this concept of the virtual DOM and DOM diffing. And so if you don't know what that is, obviously you have your normal DOM, or document object model, that represents all of the attributes, tags, properties, the state of our application. And the way React said, okay, so if I type in this text box, or I click this button, we're going to track that in a copy or a virtual DOM. And then when we do our state refresh, we will compare and contrast all of the attributes all the way down, and then update the real DOM with the differences we find. So that is the process of DOM diffing. You can see on the left side of your screen, I have the code that runs this very simple application. And let's see, maybe this is a good point to jump over here. I have running natively a Svelte app, a Vue app, and a React app. If you're an Angular fan or something else, I'm sorry, there's just too many out there. So I picked these three for now. Like I said, there's a Hello World app on all of them, where I can come in here, type in hello search. I can click a button. It can react appropriately on the Vue side, just to prove that I'm not making this up as we go. It all is an exact copy and works in all my environments. And so if I look at the code for the React app, we have two variables at the top, count and name. We're using this useState hook. If you don't know what hooks are, that's OK. You don't have to worry about it. We have a function called increment count, a function called name change. And we have our markup below that responds to those events and calls the functions accordingly. And so as I'm clicking this button, it'll go through and say, hey, do I have a div with class name? Yep, nothing's changed to keep it. We go to the h1 tag, hello, name, search. Nothing's changed, we're good. Input, we go through there, nothing's changed. And we do all this all the way down until we realize that this count has updated. And we go, aha, we got to mark that. And then we update. That's a very tedious, a very inoptimal approach to state management, in my opinion. And the only thing I can keep asking myself is, can we do better? And so I started looking around. As you haven't guessed, I did find Svelte, but I started looking around to see if anybody else did this differently. And if those of you aren't familiar, I'm sure we all know what Stack Overflow is, but they do a awesome web developer, not just web developer, they do a developer survey every year. And they do a number of range of categories. This happens to be the snapshot of the web framework one. I know it's probably very tiny for all of you, but at the very top was a technology I had never heard of, and it was Svelte. And it was one of the most desired, loved frameworks out there. And so I began to look. So introducing Svelte. Stands for attractively thin, graceful, and stylish. The main guy who worked on this and founded it is Rich Harris. If you ever get to see a talk by Rich, he is brilliant. Very, very awesome guy. And he started working on this as an open source project back in 2016. And you'll see the big thing as a difference that I want you to think about is Svelte isn't so much a framework, but it's a way to organize our mind around the code we write, and it's a compiler first and foremost. Thinking about the new framework as a compiler instead. So when I write all of my code, it goes through a compilation step, and then the thing that gets deployed is that compiled code that is already optimal. There's no framework stuff that gets delivered to the client browser. It's all vanilla, plain JavaScript that runs on the real DOM. And that is very different from other frameworks out there. Another big thing, because of the definition of Svelte, which I think is very appropriate, as he was developing this, Rich Harris has been quoted saying he would copy any of the components he had in his React apps he was working on into a Svelte equivalent. And he found on average that the Svelte app was around 40% less code or less characters on the screen, which is huge for, we're already worrying about so much as developers day to day, whether that's all the boilerplate code, our requirements, bugs, changing requirements. And so just less stuff on the screen for us to worry about is obviously a plus. Obviously, when then you deploy this code, it's less space on the client browser, and all that is also a bonus. So I did mention a lot of code. I showed this already, but if I break into here, so I've already showed you the React version. I'll show you the Vue one next. It's also very similar. If you're not a Vue person or you don't know a lot about it, it's quite all right. At the top, we do things a little backwards. So we have our template at the top instead of the bottom like React, but the markup is largely the same. And then you'll notice immediately if you're not used to Vue code, there's a lot of boilerplate here. In defining what the name of our component is, we actually have to label our methods as methods instead of just knowing that they're a method. And then at the bottom, we can't just define variables. It has to be in this data function that we have defined in our component. But the big thing here that I think Vue improves on React is I don't have to use this use state hook for everything. I can also have this concept where I have these variables, and I simply do an assignment to those data properties, and that will trigger the reactivity for Vue. And so if you also notice, I don't have a function defined for that name. So we have an input up here, and this V model is some fanciness that basically says, as we type in this inbox, you should bind whatever value is in there into this variable. And so when I display that variable in my h1 tag, it gets updated. I don't have to call another set name method or anything like that, which is a huge bonus. And then, finally, the exciting part, routes. Here's the Svelt code. You can ignore the commented stuff at the bottom. It's kind of a cheat sheet for me. But the first thing you'll notice is there's no boilerplate here anymore. I have a script tag. I have JavaScript. I have HTML markup, and that's it. I have two parameters at the top, name and count. I have two functions, which look similar to the React app. Then if you look at my markup below, I have hello name, which binds to my name variable. I have an input, same as always, and it's very obvious. It's not like Vue model. There's no like Svelte, there's no S model, right? It's just on input, so it tries to be very direct. On click, again, tries to be very direct. And then I can also show you this. We don't actually even need this anymore. If I want with Svelte, I can simply do a bind to the value. And so now we get that two-way binding just like we had with Vue, so that takes care of that. And then with Svelte, I can inline this guy. Right, save this off. You can see if I go back to my Svelte app, it still works like before, still clicks. And now I only have 2 lines of JavaScript if you're not counting that inline function, which is insane in terms of what we had before. So for the fancy bits, if I move on here, we went through these already. Side by side, I think this becomes very fascinating. You can see the Svelte code is always going to be on the left. I'll try to keep it there and then compare it to what React and Vue are doing on the other side. You can see it really is about 40% less code. We don't need to have this concept of use state in our model. Like Svelte just takes care of that for us. React has this complexity there that needs it, and it just boggles at my mind. So I have to think about that when I shouldn't really have to. At the end of the day, it's a variable that I want to have this binding to my markup with, and that's it. Why do I have to overcomplicate it? Same thing with Vue. Cool. So this is all nice and good. We saved some code, but what's the point? What's wrong with the virtual DOM? Why are we writing a new framework just to solve this problem? I do not think the virtual DOM is slow. I think it's fast. If it wasn't fast, we wouldn't be using any of these frameworks. There wouldn't be any front-end apps or anything like that because no one would use apps. They'd all be unusable. The question I think that is better is the virtual DOM fast enough? I think that answer is no, and here's why. I will explain with another sample. And this code actually might be too small, but don't worry about it yet. We'll blow it up when I flip back over to my other desktop here in a second. I will show you what this app's going to do for each of these. So I have eat, sleep, learn, svelte, and repeat. Pretty simple. I can check these done, so they put an X in front. And I can hide my items that are done with this checkbox. And so as I check them off, they are out of sight, out of mind. That's the React one, excuse me. And then we have the Vue one as well that works identically to that one. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is in React world, we obviously have to have some array that keeps track of our to-do items. And if we look at this, we have a filtered array that I'm setting based on the value of that checkbox. So if we're hiding our items that are done, we'll filter on our to-dos item for items that are obviously done. And then otherwise, we'll return the whole array. But React has this concept of use memo, and they also have some other lifecycle events like did, component, update, and things like that to keep track of what parts of your application are updating and reacting to state change. And so in this case, we have use memo, and that basically it's us as a developer telling the application, you need to only update this array if things that are dependent on also update. So if hide done changes, then we'll update filtered. If to-dos changes, we update filtered. Without this, every time state changes, that React app is rerunning that entire component's worth of code and rerunning it every time state changes, which is, like I said, incredibly inefficient. So we're putting more responsibility on top of all the boilerplate to determine when parts of our app should interact with our lifecycle, which is a lot of extra things to worry about. Before I get into showing you the Vue and the Svelte code, is a concept of reactive programming. And so this is a very trivial example. We're all smart enough to know that if a is 1 in this case, and I create a variable b that is equal to a plus 1, b's value is 2. If I set a to 10, 2 is not 11, right? We know this. I have to then say b is equal to a plus 1 again, so that b would be 11 and equal 11. But what if we had a special character in JavaScript that let us be reactive, such that if a is 1, we're going to mark b in a way that we'll say b is bound to that value of a. So as a changes, b's value updates along with it. So if we say a plus 1, it is now 2. If we set a to 10, b sees that update. So b is also 11, and it's true by default. And this, if you haven't seen this before in JavaScript, is valid JavaScript, by the way. It is called a labeled statement, and to me it's very smelly. And if I know we're all either love or hate JavaScript, but I super don't like labeled statements. But Normally, it's used to like put a label before a loop or reference different parts of code so you can jump around, which I wouldn't do if I were you. But Svelte, in our cases, is going to hijack this, like all frameworks do with JavaScript, and use it for our benefit. And so if I jump over to the code here, as promised, this will all make sense. I'll show you the React version first. Sweet. Can we see this okay? I can blow it up maybe a little bit. All right, so with the React version, we have our to-do list here. We have 2 properties on it. It's going to be a done flag and then the text. We have a toggle done function that happens as I click each item. It basically just flips this flag. I have a hide done variable that I'm setting here. We have a toggle hide done function that gets called as I check that checkbox. Here's that use memo that I showed earlier, and then my markup's not super important. But basically, it's just the label with my input for the checkbox, and then I have my unordered list to show all of my items. In the Vue world, again, we put our markup at the top. So we have a checkbox here, my label. This piece of text that was kind of nested in the label in the React version. We have our unfiltered list again. And then down here, we have to define this filtered concept for Vue. And that's kind of what I'm getting at with this reactive $: thing. Vue, you have to specify variables that are computed variables. And so they update as things that are dependent on update. And so it's kind of, we declare it as a function, not a variable. But we're basically saying anytime hide done changes or to-dos changes, I can reference filtered in my code up here, and we'll see that change happen as state changes. Same thing with showing. In my methods, I have that same exact toggle done function, and then down here, I'm defining my list of to-dos. And show, if I jump over to the Svelte version, you can see I'll show you the code and just here in a minute. But I've done my best to keep it as copy and paste from the React version as I could. And in the current state, it's not going to work because in the Svelte version, we have here we go, the same const filter declaration that we had in React. This is going to look a lot similar to the React version than the Vue one did. But as I was figuring out how Svelte handles its reactivity, this makes me more confused how Reactive does it. Basically, you can't, like, it's all done through assignments, right? So for arrays, I can't say array.push or pop or anything like that, and it will see it. I have to do an actual assignment. But it's also, we've marked that as a constant. Why does that work in React? To me, that, like, in every other language, we shouldn't be changing things that are constants. And because of the assignment, I can't simply do this, because this is only going to get evaluated the first time this code runs, and it's not going to be reactive to the values of hide done and to-dos. Instead, I have to use this reactive syntax to mark it. And if this looks like black voodoo magic, I'm sorry. It scared me at first too, but we'll get there together. So if I save this, we come back to the Svelte app, and you can see now I can check my items and hide them appropriately. I can go one step further, and I can make reactive variables that are dependent on other reactive variables. So I can say showing equals filtered.length. That's completely valid. I can come down here and say showing of to-dos.length. Save this off. Come up here, you can see this new text that I added. As I check them, nothing happens yet because we're not hiding anything. As soon as I hide this, you can see now it says 3, 2, 1, and then 0. I think the interesting part of this is not that this works, but so much what it compiles down to. So if I look at our console here, when you come up here to look at your source code, you'll see that in the source, routes, if I find that same file, which is already open here, it'll have the same name, but this will not be the same exact, well, actually, wait, here we go. Which one is it? Here we go. So this is going to be the compiled version that we'll get. And this is a lot of jargon that even I don't understand. I don't need to. But if you scroll down, you'll start to see things that are a little bit more familiar. Maybe it's this one. Here we go. Yeah. So we have this update loop that we've defined. And in here, this is what will run every time we want to refresh our app due to a state change. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to see, is hide done or to-dos marked as dirty? In other words, have they changed? If they have, there's obviously other things we've written in our component that are dependent on those values, so we need to invalidate those. So we're going to invalidate our filtered array so that when we update our state, we can already tell that that is something that we need to take care of. But there's also showing, that showing variable that's dependent on the filtered. So we're going to check if filtered changed and then invalidate showing as well. And this ordering is very important. It keeps the topological ordering so that obviously if showing is dependent on filtered, if it works the other way around, it's not going to work, right? And this solves that problem of DOM diffing. We no longer have to go through the DOM and say, did this change? Nope, keep it. Did this change? Nope. We already have an object that keeps track of every variable and where it is in the markup and whether it changes or not. We can go straight to the actual DOM and before our DOM manipulation due to keeping track of these changes this way. And that proves to be much faster, as you'll see later. And so that's the complete version. And I don't have a side-by-side comparison in my slides, but what I can do is show you here. If I do yoink. And I'll just make this a wee bit smaller. But you can see the Svelte version ends on line 39, while the Vue one goes all the way to 53, and the React goes to 47. So we're saving a lot of characters also in this case. Let's jump back over here. So you can also do conditional rendering of elements, and you can do list generating just like any other framework. Syntax is not too insane. I have a sample component here. It's got 3 buttons. Red, blue, and green. I'm trying to keep this really simple for us this late in the day. You can see the markup on the left. I just have a selected color variable. I have a set color function that gets called as I click the buttons, and that sets the text of my span tag at the bottom, as you can see. If I want to show you these apps running, I have 2 versions. There's red, blue, green. Red, blue, green. Ooh, okay. Nice. That works, but let's say, obviously this is probably not the best use case. Like most of our apps at our day-to-day are not going to have a list of 3 values in an array. We'll have much more complex data models. We'll have much more complex lists of unknown length. So copying and pasting this button definition all around and changing out that text really isn't going to work for us. Here's those samples too if you wanted to see those side by side. So even this basic example is a significant improvement on the other 2. But here we go with this example, right? I have now a pound each syntax to do my list generating. I can now reference my color. So it's each colors as color, which I don't know about you guys, but every other language I work in, every other framework I work in that does in each loop like this, it's always like for color in colors or something like that. So just to note, it's backwards, which I kind of hate, but it's okay. But then I can reference color in my button definition, and it still shows up on the screen just as before. I've added some fun flavor text to the bottom that says if we don't have a color selected, we're going to render a span tag that says pick a color. If it picks red, that's my favorite color. And then the last case, if it's anything else, we'll say it's almost as cool as red. And I can show these examples here. Red, blue, green, as you can see. red, blue, green. Lastly, red, blue, green. The thing I want to point out here, if I jump into the code, so, routes, boom. I'm not in love with this pound each. I feel like it's less terse than other things I've seen in Svelte. It seems to take up more, it's almost like I don't know, it just like jumps out at me a lot, and it kind of messes with my thinking when I'm doing this. Same thing with this syntax. But if I show you Vue, this is something I actually prefer, I think. Vue has this cool concept of v4. It's an attribute that's built in. And you can say v4, and like I mentioned earlier, it's color in colors. And then you can reference this color throughout the rest of that block or whatever you do. And then down here, you also have a vif, velse if, velse, that's all inlined. And it keeps your markup a little smaller. But the one thing that I think that stands out as a plus to this blocky syntax is I purposely put these conditional pieces here after the class. It doesn't matter where in that element you put it. Imagine if I had a span that had some 5 attributes, maybe it's got some data attributes, and whatever developer wrote this stuck the vif all the way at the very end, and it's off my screen. If I don't scroll over, I can't see it. In this case, there's no way you can miss it, right? So in this case, I think it keeps your code more organized. I know exactly what I'm looking at. I know I'm going to be generating buttons for every color in this array, and I know I have some conditional rendering here. If I go to the React version, you'll see React does it a little similar. Actually, it's even weirder. So I actually have to generate a separate child component that I'm going to use inside of my React component here. I'm making a component called colorList that will take in via props a color array. And then via all my colors, I will map that to a button that will get returned in this component definition. And then so down here, I'm defining my color array, which gets passed to my colors. And then they do something really goofy. And if you like JavaScript, but you're new to JavaScript, maybe this will make you hate JavaScript. And if you hate it, you know why. And if you like it, you're crazy just like me. JavaScript has this concept of truthy falsy, and the way they evaluate expressions. Oh, this can't be my application. Based on truthy and falsy values, as I set those equal to a variable, it will always return whatever the last thing that it happens. So like in this case, if I say let bool test equal true and hi stir trek, if you're new to JavaScript, that's going to look really goofy because the string isn't a bool expression, right? How can I have a valid expression that's a bool value and a string value? But we can do that, and JavaScript will see that true is obviously true, because true is true, and true equals 1, and true equals text. Oh, which should. Well, there you go. JavaScript's fun, right? But obviously, 0 is falsy, empty string null. I think what I meant to do was this. Nope. See, there you go. But if I look at my bool test, you can see the value of bool test is not a bool value. It's a string of hi stir trek. And so the reason why so basically, I should say React took advantage of that and said, well, hey, if this color, if this expression is truthy, I'm going to return this span tag to my front end. And that will get rendered on the screen. If this is truthy, we'll return this, and so on and so forth. And if these are all false, then we won't render anything that comes after it. We just return false, and nothing gets rendered. So unless you know how JavaScript under the hood works, apparently I don't, as I'm doing these tests and I'm failing. It's even confusing for me, someone who actually loves and works with JavaScript day to day. And so side by side, this is what these look like. Like I said, I think Vue saves some lines of code with their syntax, but again, they get hidden away in the rest of the definition of your component. And then React gets really complicated. So as I'm talking about components, let's jump into how Svelte handles components. And I'm not going to get into component-driven design. I think that can be a whole other talk all by itself. I could talk for an hour about that all by itself. But we're going to keep this really simple. This is a static component. There's not really any JavaScript involved, but you can see how we define components and import them and export different things. So if you see on the left side of your screen, I have a parent component called index.svelte. It imports a child component from a different Svelte file, and that's in my script tag. I have a paragraph tag that says this paragraph is purple. I'm rendering my child component, and if you can see up there, there's a number prop that I'm passing a value of 100 into, and I'm defining some style for this component. My child component definition down below, we're going to say export let number equals 0, and that's how we are going to tell it that number is a prop that we're expecting. I can pass in a default value by saying equals 0. If I didn't do that, it would be like undefined on the screen if I didn't give it anything. And then I have a paragraph tag here that says this paragraph is not purple, and then we are going to output our prop value below that. And so if you're following along at home, you'll notice we have scope styling out of the box. Anything I define in the parent component is not going to affect the styles of components it uses, anything around it. So you can see that purple color text has not gone down to the child component. There's nothing extra that I had to do to define that. You can obviously define global styles. You can have layouts in Svelte, just like you can with other frameworks. But if you have very specifically styled components that need to be put throughout your application that need to look consistent, you can define these styles all in the same file, so you are guaranteed that they will look the same. If you look at the Vue version, and that is entirely too small. Here we go. Here's the parent component. We have a template at the top. That is pretty much the exact same markup as before. We're importing that child component. And in Vue, it gets a little goofy, right? I have to tell it even that I'm using it. You didn't notice I didn't have to do that in Svelte. But I have to say, hey, this component, this parent component is going to use this child component, so expect it in my markup. Even if I don't use it, if I'm using a linter, it'll complain at me. But I also have to keep this camel case, and I have to do this lowercase hyphenated case up here. If it doesn't have that pattern, I guess, it will also complain and not realize what I'm trying to do. So it's very specific on how it wants things. And then the only thing that's different with my style is that Vue wants this scoped attribute on my style tag, and then it handles that the same way we had in Svelte World. If I look at my child component, this is almost identical. But instead of just defining a normal variable equals 0, I have this 5-line JSON object that has number with a default value of 0. So it does the same thing, it's just a little bit more code that I have to go through, a little more boilerplate. We jump to the React version. React version does a really good job here, in my opinion. We're importing that child component. We don't have to register it anywhere. We just can use it in my markup already, which is awesome. And I can keep the same name, so I even get this highlighting, and if you're using different editors. I get that same thing in Svelte. I'm still passing this in. And then if I go to my source and show the child component as well, this is exactly the same. Props comes in through a parameter into my component, and I can access it like this. The one thing you notice is there's different ways you can handle importing styles into your React components. But in my case, the easiest way was just define some global style. Scope styles are a little more complicated. I'm still defining my styles probably in some external CSS file and importing them, either using CSS modules or whatever else, however you want to handle it. But what I'm trying to say is I can't keep all of that code in the same file like I can with Vue and Svelte. If that's something that's important to you, that's important to know if you're choosing a framework. And I guess I didn't show you what the output of these actually looks like. You'll notice they're all exactly the same. Cool. And so side by side, this is what you have. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but you can just see the amount of code we have from one to the other. Moving to the React version, here's that extra styling that I showed you at the bottom. Awesome. As our applications grow in size, we obviously can't have, normally with component-driven design, you're going to have all of your data defined at the top. You pass data down to your child components through properties. You emit your data or your events upwards so that you can update data appropriately. But as we grow in size, that becomes unmanageable. And sometimes we need to have state management tools or data stores. In Vue, we have Vuex. React, you might use something like Redux. Svelte doesn't have some fancy name. It's just built into the framework as it is. And so with Svelte, we can have 3 different types of data stores. We have writable stores, readable stores, and derived stores. And the power of these is that I can change a value from one component, and I can read from it in another component on another whole other part of my application. They don't have to be related, and I'll have to pass this around. I just subscribe or update the store value appropriately. So with my writable store, as it sounds, you can write to the store and change its value. You can update it, and you can subscribe to it and update your local copy of that variable if you need to. You define it just like I see on the second line. You have export const count equals writable of 0. So I'm creating a store called count. It has a default value of 0. I can then, in components, as long as I'm importing my count store, I can subscribe to it or write to it. Readable is the same, except for you can't write to it. Pretty simple. I like how they kept this easy for me. The only difference here with readable is I have new date. That is the first argument that goes into the store. That's my default value. That's what it's always going to be, unless I do something else. But like that's what it's going to be. No other component can write and change that. They can only read from it. The second takes in a function that runs when something pulls this out and subscribes to it. So, and then below was a new concept for me. I think this is more of a niche case for when you might use it. But there is a derived store type. With derived stores, you can get your value derived from other data stores. So in this example, we have a time store. And I'm going to create a store called elapsed that I'm going to derive it off of. And through some math round thingy, I can determine the amount of seconds that has occurred since I've created the store. So you could render this on a page. When the page loads, you can see a ticker that keeps going up, and you can keep track of how many seconds you've been on the screen. If we put this into action, I'm going to use a writable store for my example. I've sort of hijacked my color button example, and I've broken it up into some different components and written a store that handles the flow of data. I wouldn't recommend doing this. So don't be like, well, Brendan said at SurTrek. But in this case, you have your parent component. You're defining the import color. That's our store. We're importing our child component color buttons. We have a selected color variable. And then here's that subscribe function I've been talking about. It takes in a lambda that will run every time the value of the store changes. So I can update my local selected color variable property as my store updates. I'm going to render my child component, and then finally the value of the button I clicked below. The child component itself is the 3 buttons you can see on your screen. And then here's that set method I was talking about. So inside of that set color function, which is going to get called as I click buttons, we're going to call set on the store and pass that value up to the store. And then the store definition here should look very similar from my last slide. So if we see this in action, we can see we have a pick color as our default value we define for our store. As I click buttons, we get red, blue, green. And to prove that this is working, as you'll notice if I jump back over here, right? This has been resetting every time. If I jump away, come back, it resets. But if I come back here, it's still going to say green because we're saving that up in a store that I can access across my different components and without my different routing in my application. And you're like, oh, well, that's all nice and good, but it's very limiting, right? Like, if all I have is a set function, what if I have 10 lines of code that I have to use to compute some value, and then I'm calling set, and I'm copying and pasting this around, or I'm putting this in places I don't really want? Well, good news, we can customize it. So with custom stores, oh, I skipped a slide. With custom stores, in terms of Svelte, all you need is a subscribe function defined, and it's good to go. Then we're using a store. So this is the old one on the left side you can see, and on your right side you can see we're still importing that writable, and if I jump to the bottom, we're going to create a store called color again. I'm calling this function that I've written that defines my store. So we're going to import these specific methods of our writable store, specifically subscribe and set. I can then return an object that has that subscribe function on it because we need it to be a store. And then I'm defining my own custom function called setColor. In this case, it's very trivial, but like I said, if you have 10 lines of code that need to run, you know you can have this in one place, and it will absolutely happen every time you set a value to the store. And so in this case, you can see it works exactly the same. Jumping back and forth, and we can have a little bit of fun with how this works. And so if I go into my data stores one, I eventually said that there's not a set method on here, right? So if I change this to set, and I save it, and I come back up, when I start clicking on red, it's not going to work. And my console window will tell me that set is not a function. We haven't exposed it. Obviously, I can come back into my store definition, re-expose it, because we've imported it here, and then it will start to work. Maybe. Nope. It's fine. Oh, I didn't save it. Ta-da! There you go. But like I said, we didn't want to do that. We wanted just to use this like this. And the good thing about this now is I can inline these, and now all this functionality just becomes one line of an import statement. So we've already shrunken our component down a lot with that, which I think is very powerful. So there was that, all in one go, so you can see all of it there. So if I go into performance of the different applications, I had this grand plan. I was gonna, write some custom solutions. Obviously, with a full-time job and other hobbies, I didn't have that to work out. But I found this really cool website on GitHub that, and this is just a few of the examples. I know this is probably entirely too small, but I put Svelte, vanilla JavaScript up there, Vue, React, and Angular for fun. And this is a very small screenshot of a lot of the metrics they keep. If you can't see the numbers, just look at the colors. That's a good indication, right? You can see that Svelte and Vue do pretty good. But I think Svelte still comes up on top, and you can see that at the very bottom. There's like some values they calculate. And then I think where things really start to suffer is in the React world and in the Angular world. If something like performance and app size is absolutely crucial to your workflow and to your business and to your product, this is definitely something to keep in mind. I'm not saying Svelte is the only performant framework out there. But in this case, it does shine very brightly according to the other frameworks that dominate the market. Just because it is low power code, there's less code, and we're working with the real DOM, right? So maybe I've converted you and you think this is really cool. How do you adopt it? Well, like I said, it's a pretty new framework. There's a growing community. There's growing documentation, but it's a little hard to find. If you go to their website, it is svelte.dev. They have a lot of cool tutorials. They have a lot of cool documentation, different examples. But most importantly, I think the cool thing is they have a REPL out there. And on the REPL is kind of like a sandbox. So this is a screenshot of a REPL when you first load the screen. You get an app.svelte file open on the left. You can press the plus to add other JavaScript files. You can add other Svelte files, CSS files, and import them into everything you want. You can see the output on the right side of what you're going to see on the screen. You can see your JavaScript output, your CS output, so on and so forth, and tinker with this however you want. What I've outlined in the red box at the top right, you can actually create an account so you can save this and use your workflows up here just for temporary stuff. I wouldn't recommend using this in place of source control, but most importantly, there's a download link here. When you download that, you get a zip file of all the things you've created up here. All you have to do is extract those files. You open up a command prompt in there. You run npm install, followed by npm run dev. You will have the same app running up here, already running locally. And you'll have all the tooling you need to develop your application and package it up for production and ship it. Maybe you're thinking, this is really cool, but I need some more tooling. I'm used to, with Vue, maybe you're used to Nuxt. If you're a React person, you can do React, or Next. And if you're a Svelte person, we have Svelte Kits. Svelte Kit is in beta, I believe, still. But if you're familiar with Svelte Kit, you might be on Sapper, which is an older version of what this is. And if you're on there, you should move over. Svelte Kit will be the new hotness for the extra tooling you'll get with Svelte. With this, you're going to get different tooling, like I said, with server-side rendering options, search engine optimization. We can have routing systems that are built straight in. And actually, as like a quick little note, all of these applications are written with these extra tooling frameworks that I'm talking about. So this React app is written with Next.js. This is Nuxt. And this is my Svelte Kit app. As a quick overview of how they organize it. So when you install it, it's pretty simple. There's not a whole lot of stuff in here. Obviously, you can have your static assets here. You can define all of your source code here. So like I mentioned before, all my pages, all my components are going into my routes. When I create a file, for example, hello world, right? I have in lib a header. This is that static header that you're seeing up here. So I can generate links, which are all creating these anchor tags, right? And I'm specifying a routing, but you notice I'm not specifying a file if you're new to this routing system that a lot of these frameworks can provide for you. All I had to say was there is a file named hello world.svelte in a route folder. And under the hood, when I run it, the Svelte runtime says, OK, here is a route I'm going to generate. If you generate a hyperlink to it, which if you notice up here, you can see that change. It knows where to find that file and pulls it down and renders it to the screen appropriately. I'm not doing anything fancy with server-side rendering here, obviously, but those are other options that you can mess with. There's not a ton of standard yet on how you can define components, but I try to keep everything neatly tied here. Here's my stores in a separate place. Like I said, you can have global CSS, and it gives you a bunch of stuff to get you started. And that's really all there is to it. If I jump back over here. Last thing I want to mention is that Svelte has a really big Discord community. So if I actually go back to you again, if I had an internet connection, I could show you this live. But at the top here, from the homepage, there's always that Svelte Kit button if you want to learn more about Svelte Kit. And there's also instructions on the main homepage and on Svelte Kit, how you can get started as well if you forget everything I just said. Maybe we got too excited from the Doctor Strange movie, and we're just like, that's all I want to think about. But then here also there's like a dialogue link. You can click on that, which will give you an invite to the Discord. And the Discord community is really active. It's people that are actively contributing, asking questions, posting code, and helping each other learn Svelte together as we fill in the gaps and make Svelte an awesome product that we can all learn to love. There's that website link if you wanted to see it again. And that's all the content I had today. I don't know if there's any questions. I had more time than I thought, but.
We had one come through.
OK, cool.
If you had to make a design system from scratch, what front-end framework would you use, given a whole org has to use it?
If I had to create a whole design system from scratch,
Yeah, that's the question.
what framework would I use knowing the whole org has to use it? Well, that is a very difficult question. I think it's very subjective. It depends on what your goals are. It depends on what you're making and what your skill set is for the team already. I'm a big proponent of, if your team is completely new to front-end frameworks and, the ES5 stuff is new, Webpack's new, and all that good stuff, like, trying to run up a next app with React is going to be maybe a little overwhelming because it's a more involved ecosystem, things like that. It's hard to answer. I guess I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer for that. But whatever you have more knowledge up front with to get you started is going to be better, and you can learn as you go. They all have different uses, but it's not like I'm sitting here saying React and Vue are bad. There's obviously have a place, not going to go anywhere anytime soon, I don't think. So hopefully that's good enough. Yeah. What's a time when I would not use Svelte? Well, if I have to go production ready and I want to use Svelte Kit tomorrow, I would not use Svelte because it's still in beta. Trying to think why else I wouldn't use Svelte. If you have a very slow development process, maybe not, because I imagine as they keep working on things, they'll release new versions. I can't say that I really hope they wouldn't have like breaking changes from version to version, but because it's newer, obviously keeping up with the documentation, any changes that will come to it. As Svelte Kit matures, I imagine it will change. So if you're not willing to take on that rework and that risk, maybe that's why you wouldn't use Svelte. You might want to use something that's more established like React or Vue or Angular. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Oh, yes. Yes, there is TypeScript support. Thank you for mentioning that. I was going to say that. So I probably don't have internet, so I can't do it. But you can do like npm init svelte at something. It's on their website, and it walks you through a whole set of options for setting up your skeleton project, and there is TypeScript support. That was actually a big complaint for a long time of Svelte Kit. They didn't provide TypeScript support, and people were like, boo, hiss, we hate JavaScript, we want TypeScript. So that was a big update that came out recently. So yes, they do have that, which is awesome. Yes?
With the low overhead and lack of boilerplate, what are the pitfalls for running bad code?
Pitfalls for running bad code. I think even with the boilerplate, if you have bad code, like are you saying like performance-wise, or like what are like the what are the odds you're gonna write bad code? Is that what you were saying? Well, okay, so I think, like, let's say, for example, if we jump over, so the question was, what pitfalls could you go into, like, accidentally as you're writing Svelte? Did I get that right? If we look at something like Vue, right? What's a good example? So Vue is very opinionated about how I'm organizing my code. I have to put computed things in computed. I have to put methods in methods. You know, there's a very like clear like design and like approach styling system how they want their code to look. It's all on their website. I have for this Nuxt app, when I set it up, it has linting by default. Like it comes included, and it will yell at me, and it won't even run. Like if I do something like, even if I do this, if I put a semicolon and I go to the Vue app, I think it'll yell at me. When it reloads here, 10%, what do you mean? There, see? I get an error because of my linter. That's like, hey, don't do that. That's not our style. Svelte, you can use linters that will help you, but I think at the end of the day, Svelte might be more dangerous. It's less opinionated because at the end of the day, right, we're writing, if I look at that same to-do list app, this is just plain old JavaScript. Everything in here is syntactically correct in terms of JavaScript. Even this reactive marking, that will run in the browser. It may not do what you want without the Svelte compiler, just because this is different in normal JavaScript. It's a labeled statement. But I think you just have to, it's putting responsibility on you, I guess, to understand the language you're writing. If I give any developer who doesn't have any C# experience and I say, hey, go write me a .NET 6 app, even though there's a lot of video content out there and teaching you how to do it, if you don't know what you're doing, you're still going to write bad code, right? So at the end of the day, we need to know the language we're writing in. But I think to your point, it is less opinionated in that sense. So you can probably get away with some stuff, for better or for worse. I don't know. So that could be one downside. So it also ties back to the other question why you wouldn't use Svelte. If you have lesser powerful or lesser skilled JavaScript developers on your team, maybe something to think about. Maybe you want something that's a little more opinionated that will hold your hand in terms of how you structure your code, or use a linter. Good question. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but in the back.
I was looking at the benchmarks you had for, it showed Vue and Svelte as being pretty fast. I was wondering, larger applications, are the differences more pronounced for any of them?
So the question was, when I was showing these metrics, how do they apply to more complex applications versus simple? Obviously, I'm imagining these are pretty simple apps that they build for these cases, right? As it grows, obviously the numbers are going to change, and it depends on how you write it, what your app's trying to do, all that same stuff. Are you calling an API? Things that are outside of our control with network issues, things like that. I imagine it will change. I have not personally done these tests, but at the end of the day, we are writing vanilla JavaScript that's already working with the actual DOM, so we're getting a benefit up front. And we're deploying less code, so even with caching strategies, when we first hit a page, we'll pull that down because that's a single page app, and the ones I've written, right? But it's less code to pull down because there's less boilerplate, there's less framework involved, right? So I guess like kind of yes, no, I don't know. It's hard. Like I said, maybe when I get some more free time and I build this huge, cool benchmarking application I said I was going to do, I can do another talk about it. Good question, though. Yes?
I don't know if you wanted to mention about the relationship between the New York Times and the origin of where Svelte came from.
Yes, also funny. Good, yeah, I guess this is good. So if you don't know Rich Harris, he's not even a developer full time, which makes me feel really bad. He is a graphics editor for the New York Times and was like, I'm bored, I'm going to write a JavaScript framework. Cool, I guess. Yeah, so and I feel like I'm pretty good, and wow, so you can do anything. That's the takeaway, right? I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add, but yeah, I did know about that. Yeah, Rich is a very talented man. If you ever get a chance to check out any of his talks, I highly recommend it. It's mesmerizing. Cool, though.
But wasn't Svelte created for that particular web project, and they're needing to?
It could have been. I actually don't know the answer to that. I'll have to do some research on that, yeah. I'm sure. I do know that the New York Times uses Svelte in their application, or in some of their sites. I do know that for a fact, because Rich talks about it, and if you can go out there and poke around, you can actually see some of the decompiled code and references there. But yeah, I don't know exactly what reason they started developing it there for. Anything else? We have like about 2 minutes-ish. If you're in the back corner, I can't see because of the light, so I'm sorry. Awesome. Well, those are really good questions. If you think of anything else, you can feel free to come up and say hi. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and GitHub, and you can send me DMs there if you want. I'll try to get to them as I can. But really, I just want to say thank you to StirTrek. I want to say thank you to the sponsors, the volunteers, and to all of you for staying awake at this hour for this code-heavy talk and sharing your day with me. Have a great rest of your day at StirTrek, and yeah, thanks again.